Good afternoon, everyone. We are so happy to have you here. I'm Martha Joseph. I work at Ability Central, and I have the privilege of being your moderator today. This session, Dollars and Cents, Trust, Savings, and Support, is part of the It's All About Her, the Hope, Empowerment, and Resilience Initiative. And today we're going to be discussing the topics of ABLE accounts, TrueLink cards, special needs trusts, and the new Trump accounts. And a bit of housekeeping before we get started. I wanted to share that we want to make you feel supported any way we can throughout this session. So our ASL interpreters and the speakers will be pinned on the screen so we can stay visible. Captions are also available. Just click the CC button in your Zoom. You can adjust the font size and caption settings. If you'd like translation or multilingual captioning, use the QR code or the link that we're going to share in the chat. For questions and comments, please use the Q&A box to share any questions, thoughts, or comments, and we'll have time at the end of the session to share them. And with that, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming today's speakers, Stephen Dale, lawyer and disability advocate with more than 30 years of experience serving the disability community, and Amy Tessler, education and outreach coordinator at the Dale Law Firm and ambassador for the ABLE National Resource Center. Stephen and Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having us and sharing this important subject.
So I would love to, before we dive in, start with a bit of a personal question. Why have you dedicated so much of your time to supporting the disability community?
For the last 30 years, I have been the principal attorney at the Dale Law Firm. We're a somewhat unusual law firm that all we do is do planning and settlement planning for persons with disabilities here. And a lot of what I want to share with you today is what we've learned, but also to understand the complexity of dealing with all these benefits and community living and some of the important tools involved in this.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. And Amy, how about you?
Okay, well, you introduced me based on my qualification as being part of the Dale Law Firm and being an ABLE ambassador, but my most important qualification is that I have a son who's on the autism spectrum. He was diagnosed when he was 3 years old. He's now 30, so this was 27 years ago, and I actually knew like nothing about autism. I immediately immersed myself learning everything I could. I got involved in my community and adult and support groups, in email chats, and basically tried to get him involved in all the different therapies that are out there, anything I could to provide a better outcome or help him with his communication and behavior challenges. So why am I involved? Because I'm personally involved as a parent. And I started going to adult transition fairs. I started going to the community advisory committee groups for my school district. I just basically did everything I could to learn.
Thank you, Amy. I really love the theme of lived experience guiding your journeys to care and support for an entire community of people. So I appreciate you grounding us in that level of care as we dig into this very complicated but hopefully helpful subject. In your practice, are there any things in particular that you see that people tend to bring to you as issues they faced?
Well, a lot of it has to do with qualification for benefits and that sort of thing, and the complexity. I will tell you that one thing about benefits and that sort of thing is that things are getting more and more complex as time goes on, and it's getting harder and harder to deal with these kind of things. But part of it is putting it in perspective. And I will tell you, there's an emotional, oftentimes, connection with the public benefits. And we've had situations where people are terrified to do anything because they're scared to death of losing their benefits. And I think in many cases, you have to step back a little bit here and look at all the objectives. That we really have to look at what is the value of the benefits, and they're a tool. And community living isn't all about trying to stay qualified for programs. the SSI, the Medicaid, all these other programs should be tools to help you with your community living here. And you need to put this in perspective, and that the qualification, trying to stay qualified for benefits, while important, that should not be the primary objective.
Gotcha. I like that. I like that a lot. And Amy, as a mother of a disabled child, I wonder if you could share your experience with this.
Well, it wasn't until Scott was like 16 or 17 that I started worrying about this. Although when he was only 9 years old, we did set up a special needs trust for him just in case anything should ever happen to me or my husband, kind of worst case scenario planning, just in case. So we had a special needs trust set up, but it wasn't until he was getting towards the age of 18 that I started learning about some of these benefits like SSI. I didn't realize that he was even eligible for, getting something like this. And so fortunately, I learned early on that what the asset limits were, what kind of things you had to have in place in order to be eligible for SSI. And then as he aged, into 19, 20, 21, and I started working for the Dale Law Firm, fortunately, I started learning about all the other benefits, ABLE accounts, child disability benefits. And fortunately, I was able to learn early on the kind of things you had to keep in your toolbox and in your files when the time comes. So I had them, reports from the psychologist, all the IEPs, because the government doesn't care about labels. They don't care that my son has autism. They are interested in functional limitations. And fortunately, I was able to keep reports from high school, from his transition years. So when the time came that we applied for these benefits, we had documentation. And that was probably one of the most important things I learned, was what records was important to keep.
I think records are and documentation are such an everyday part of so many people's lives. And I think that as we're talking about financial planning, that in itself, not just the learning of things, but the constant documentation and tracking and the fear that goes along with that of like, what if you didn't have the right piece of paper saved at the right moment? What can that mean? And so I think that sets a lot of people on this course to kind of avoid financial planning. And so I think that we're very lucky now that there are these tools that are being developed and this care in the community that has led to these tools being created. And I'm very excited because we're going to be able to talk a bit about them. And the first of those things being, what is an ABLE account?
Actually, an ABLE account is a wonderful tool, although I will say that it's a tool. Okay, here, and the really cool thing about ABLE accounts is that it addresses a lot of different needs for persons with disabilities and families. So it's set up under, and this is significant. When it was established, it was set up under the tax law, not Social Security law, and that has a real significance here. And it was established to be able to give an alternative, a choice. Alternatives and choices are always good for persons with disabilities and families, about being able to set aside funds in a tax advantaged way, but also to be able to set aside those funds without interfering with any of the needs-based benefits. And that includes SSI, Medicaid, HUD, SNAP, so many different programs, basically anything that's a federal program. Here for persons with disabilities, the ABLE accounts are basically not counted as resources and not counted as income. They can be used for what are called qualified disability expenses. And because of time today, we don't necessarily have to go through all of them, but basically they've expanded the interpretation of what is a qualified disability expense to be almost anything that's related, not just to disability, but to daily living and that kind of thing. In fact, we're having a hard time trying to figure out what is not a qualified disability expense. So as far as we can tell, buying illegal drugs and gambling is probably not a qualified disability expense. I don't know. There are no cases on this. It doesn't affect SSI. It doesn't affect SSDI. Here, it doesn't affect HUD, so it's a safe harbor for funds here, and it can grow over time. But the cool thing is, and I hope you get this over time, and Amy has personal experience with this, is that it can be used for so many different things, but it also can be used as a way for a person with a disability to be able to have more control, more agency over their own life. Amy, what do you think?
Well, I right now, our son doesn't live at home anymore. He has an apartment with a roommate, and he has supported living services through the regional center. And the ABLE account is like a godsend for me because he can use his ABLE account when he goes out for lunch, when he goes grocery shopping, when he goes bowling or to the movies. I don't have to worry about that he has enough cash in his wallet, which has to come from me directly. He can't go to the ATM and get money out of his rep payee account. That is not allowed. And also the greatest advantage of the ABLE account through my program is that I immediately get a text message every time he spends money on his ABLE accounts. He's not the type that would abuse his card, but if he lost it and somebody found it and started spending all this money, I would know immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So it's his account, he's the owner, but I manage it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just it makes my life so much easier.
I love that. I love when things can work not just for the person, but for the community around the person to help support everybody. I wonder if we can talk a bit about who is eligible for an ABLE account, and if you can tell us a bit about this big change in eligibility that happened in 2026.
The big change is that when the ABLE program was first put in place, and people ask why, but the reason was because the Congressional Budget Office rating on this program was sky high, and in order to bring it down, because originally there was no age cap, they set an age cap at 26, and it's been that way for a long time. The recent change, and there's two recent changes that I think are big ones. One is that it's now the age of the onset of the disability has to be before the age of 46. Okay, and that includes a lot of folks. Hopefully, someday that will go away altogether. The other thing that's been going on, and I think this is like a lot of disability programs, that as time goes on and through advocates asking for change, we see an evolution. So once again, we've seen an expansion of who can not only open up an ABLE account, but who can control it, have signature authority. And so now that includes, has been expanded to include siblings and things like that. But once again, those are two recent changes. And I think that also illustrates something, that a lot of benefit programs and a lot of policy that's constantly evolving. And this is why programs like this, trying to keep up to date on these things, is so important, because things are moving so fast.
So as of 2026, the eligibility shift is anyone that has had a disability onset on or before the age of 46. Is that right?
That is. And what's important with that is there's two ways to look at this. What the law says, that if you're receiving a disability related benefit, if you're getting SSI or if you're getting Medicaid based on disability or that kind of thing, you automatically qualify. But for some folks, and in fact, this is very common for folks that are in the behavioral health or mental health community, is that oftentimes the onset may be well before 46, but maybe they didn't get their benefits until they're 50. So there is a process through something called certification, that if you can get a doctor, for instance, to write a letter, or even in some programs promise to write a letter that the disability actually began before the age of 46, not necessarily when the benefits started, you can qualify. So it's open to quite a few folks out there, and it's expanding. And, it's like everything else. It can be a great tool. Does it work for everybody? There's nothing that works for everybody. That's just the way it is.
Well said. Thank you, Steve. So I would like to take a second and kind of circle back to this concept of fear and worry, and talk a bit about How can an ABLE account help someone save money while maintaining eligibility for programs like SSI or Medicaid?
Well, one big advantage is those resources in your ABLE account don't count towards your eligibility. So let's say grandma gives you $2,000. You can put that in your ABLE account and it won't count as a resource. If you put it in your bank account, if your child does have a bank account, that would automatically kick you off of SSI. So right there is a really a lot, unless it's too much money, because ABLE accounts do have a limit of how much you can put in a year. But if it's 1,000 or 2,000, that's a really easy way to save money and not have to worry about losing your SSI. So I would say that's a big one right away. I would say, and you can also use your ABLE account to pay for rent. So let's say your SSI doesn't cover your rent because it's only, it's not very much money, and you have money in your ABLE account, you can subsidize your rent payment with your ABLE account and not be penalized either.
Ooh, oh, so that's actually a wonderful transition to my next question. What can ABLE accounts be used for?
I would almost suggest that it's easier to answer what they can't be used for. And this is once again, this is something that's kind of evolved over time. The list that you have up there is the list that is in the law itself, but through regulation and interpretation here, that the IRS interpreted that an ABLE account can be used for anything that helps with daily living for a person with a disability. And then at that point, well, it's hard to come up with, well, what doesn't? So one of the misconceptions oftentimes is that ABLE accounts can only be used for things related to the disability. Absolutely not true. It can be used for almost anything here. And in fact, to my knowledge, no one has seen a case yet where somebody has been penalized for making a distribution here that didn't qualify as a qualified disability expense. Part of this is because this is monitored by the IRS, and the IRS actually just really is not really focused on trying to ding people with disabilities, unlike Social Security, which certainly is. The other thing with it that's really nice about an ABLE account, especially when we start looking at tying them to special needs trusts and that kind of thing, the rules, which are in what's a thing called the POMS, the Program Operation Manual System, it actually says for SSI recipients that Social Security eligibility workers, with some bizarre exceptions, are not to count distributions made from an ABLE account, even if the reviewer thinks that it isn't for a qualified disability expense. So they're basically told to keep their bloody hands off of this thing. And that gives you a certain amount of safety about, once again, there is an inbred fear oftentimes of these programs here. This is something where it would be hard to mess this up. You'd have to work really hard, but it's a nice, safe place. And it also expands things. Going back to this, when I first was involved as a young psych nurse with people transitioning in the community, the whole thought of a person with a disability controlling their own money or making distributions or making purchases, that wasn't even a thing. I mean, but as time goes on, the nice thing with this is it becomes a really good tool to teach financial literacy. A lot of folks with disabilities are oftentimes not even given an opportunity to make purchases themselves. I have a family member with a developmental disability that we opened up an ABLE account for her. And she had never she was 40 years old at the time. She'd never made a single purchase for herself in her entire life. And so when we opened this up and used it as a tool, sure, the first uses she made of it were kind of strange. And we kind of went from strange to questionable. We went from questionable to, yeah, we're doing good. And at this point, she's learned. But, isn't that how we all learn? About controlling funds and that kind of thing. And the problem has been in the past that we would give somebody an opportunity, they would do something silly, and then we'd say, well, see, that just shows you that people with disabilities can't do that. ABLE accounts are good tools to learn, like we all do, how to manage money. And also, it kind of changes the mindset away from a person with a disability being somebody to be provided for, to somebody with a disability that we want to provide support so that they can be involved in their own life. They can make their own decisions. They can make the same mistakes like the rest of us.
Steve, I can't tell you how much that resonates with me. I have a daughter who has ASD, and so being able to know that, there is that equality built in for her to be able to learn, to make mistakes, to be able to take care of her needs when I may not be around to do that, and having the space to give her the training that she can use for the rest of her life is just really wonderful. So thank you for saying that. And so it's just really good to know ABLE accounts can be used for housing, rent, mortgage, transportation, education, training, personal care, you name it, it's most likely covered, right?
Once again, we're still trying to find something that's not a qualified disability expense. As far as we can tell, buying illegal drugs and gambling, yet there are no cases on this. So there we go.
I would like to talk to you a little bit now about something you brought to my attention called a TrueLink card. Can you tell me what a TrueLink card is and why someone might use it instead of a regular debit card?
What a TrueLink card is, it's an incredibly unique tool that has been a game changer in the special needs trust world, but also has become a game changer, in the disability world altogether. It's a special debit card. I almost regret calling it a debit card, and we'll go through the difference between this and other debit cards, but it's a debit card where it is owned either by a trust or an individual, not the person with the disability, but you can give them a card that is a debit card that operates just like a credit card. But the cool thing with it is that you can limit what it's used for. So, for instance, for a person on SSI, you can set it so you cannot use it for cash, because if you did, it would reduce their benefits dollar for dollar. And you can also set it so it can be used for specific items. So you can actually put a little check about whether it can be used for food, whether or not it can be used for gas, that kind of thing. You can be very specific with it. The nice thing with it is, once again, part of this in many cases is that the way of getting services or things to a person with a disability is that they might pick it up, but you had to buy it and then give it to them as an exempt resource. In a case like this, let's say that in Scott's case here, let's say Scott needs a TV set here. Instead of providing him with the TV set, he could actually take the card down, select the TV set he wants, and purchase it himself, just like anybody else, right? So it gives more control. It gives more ability to the person with a disability to be more in charge of their own life. And it's a great learning tool. The nice thing with it is that it can be monitored by somebody else, and it can be cut off at a moment's notice. I think it's a wonderful game changer, and it's really changed the disability of the special needs trust administration community.
Well, I mentioned this earlier a little bit, but Scott has an ABLE card, and he uses it weekly, several times for his day-to-day expenses, which is really valuable. One thing I didn't mention earlier related back to housing that I'd like to add is that if it's not clear about paying rent, if we give Scott $500 and he uses it to help pay his rent, he will be dinged with his SSI will be lowered. But if you do it through your ABLE account, it is not. So just in case that wasn't clear, I just want to add that. And also, when Scott still lived at home before he moved out, we were able to set up a way that Scott paid us his fair share of housing expenses through his ABLE account, and then he didn't get the deduction in his SSI. When it comes to the ABLE account, housing is the big winner. Even though you can use it for everything, in my mind, the most important thing is housing when it comes to not losing benefits. And then it's just so valuable in terms of convenience. Because for Scott, it frees me from worrying about whether he has too much money and whether he doesn't have enough money cash in his wallet. It's a really, really useful for the parent and for the person with the disability.
I love that. Again, tying it back to the community of care, everyone getting some benefit and peace of mind around that independence. That's just wonderful. I wonder if you can talk to me then a bit about the difference between a TrueLink card and an ABLE account.
There's two parts of this here, and then like everything else, things are going to get a little blurred in just a moment. With an ABLE account, um, it can be used for a number of different ways. It could be used as a savings account. So, this has always been one of the issues here for people, especially that are on SSI or Medicaid with a $2,000 resource limit, is that, well, you never could um, uh, hold anything or whatever. And so this expands that dramatically, that, once again, they could have control of much more funds through an ABLE account than they could under the basic rules. It does have tax advantage growth, and there are investment options, and I think that's an important part of it. My personal feeling is that's not the strongest part of this. I look at ABLE accounts as doing three important functions. I think one is it's a great tool for teaching financial literacy here. I also think, as we'll talk about later, it's a great way of tying it, for instance, to a special needs trust where you can actually ladle money from the special needs trust into the ABLE account. And in a lot of cases, if the beneficiary is using it, then that becomes their discretionary fund. So they're able to use those funds without them having to be monitored. Um, it also, I think, one of the strongest things it does is for people that are working, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit today, but the problem always had been before, if you worked and then you saved more than $2,000, you would end up losing your benefits, and so it just became pointless. Whereas, now you can take part of your savings on top of the annual contribution, and that just opens up so many doors. And for many people with disabilities, if it's possible, oftentimes working is the avenue of true independence. One thing, though, that is really important, so this can be good or this can be a problem, is that the premise of an ABLE account, no matter who sets it up, no matter who puts the money in, that money belongs to the individual with the disability. And unless there's a reason why they can't, they are in control of the funds. So in many cases, that is an excellent thing. In some cases, that's problematic that you have to be aware of. With the TrueLink card, it functions very similar, but it's something where, whether it's used by a family member from their own checking account or it's used as a trustee, it's a tool that allows the beneficiary to make their own purchases, usually based on the way we do this is we usually, work out what are we going to use the card for, and then set the card accordingly so that they can make purchases. So an example is, let's say we have a person with a disability that drives. Well, once again, you can use it to buy gas. You can use it to fix the car. You can use it for all these different things if the card is set correctly, and it just gives more ability to do things. It gives you an ability to do budget management. It also gives the ability to the person in control of the card. And see, that's one of the difference. The ABLE account is controlled by the ABLE beneficiary. The TrueLink card is controlled either by the trustee or the person who owns the card. Most ABLE accounts, not all, if you look at the card that's tied to it. So Amy had mentioned something about the ABLE card. In fact, that's a TrueLink card, right?
Mm. That's right. You mentioned like some states offer the debit card, so you would have both in one program essentially.
although maybe Amy can help us on that, the
Yeah.
ABLE account TrueLink card functions a little bit differently than a true TrueLink card. But, once again, functionally, they're much the same.
The CalAble card is powered by the TrueLink company, but CalAble does have a few more restrictions on the card. Whereas when you make a transfer from your CalAble account to the TrueLink card, which is called a CalAble debit card, one thing to keep in mind is a CalAble account does not act like a bank. It is not as quick. Transfers can take up to 5 days. So if you realize tomorrow your son is going out to lunch and his balance went down to $5, it's not enough time to put the money on today. So you have to plan ahead, which is true for almost anybody. But when you transfer money from a CalAble account to the CalAble card, you have to plan ahead because it's not instantaneous. Whereas if you have people might think, oh, it's like a bank. I can just move dollars from A to B and it's, automatic.
And if I
And
could
just a
mention
note
just
for
one
viewers.
last thing on this, when we were looking for something for our family member, we look at this and, once again, she has her skills, she has her challenges. But without the card, I can't imagine how she would be able to access the ABLE account. So, when you're looking at different ABLE programs and that kind of thing, in many cases, whether or not they have a card that's tied to it could be a real game changer here. Once again, our objective was to empower our family member, and without that card, I can't imagine how we would be able to do it.
Yeah, and that's just absolutely wonderful. And just a note for audiences, CalAble is actually the California version of the ABLE program, and I think that while those delays are for CalAble, I do think that they are more likely to also appear in other states. So definitely make sure that you check on the transfer timeline for your individual state's programs.
And I think it's important. There are. I have no idea how many programs there are now. I lost count, but there's well over 40. So there are many choices out there when you're shopping, and I bet you we could spend the full hour just on that alone. But once again, you want to be a good consumer, and this is where the ABLE National Resource Center is so useful because they have a comparison chart that will help folks.
Yes, and just to let you all know, we will be sharing some incredible resources that Stephen and Amy have shared with us to pass on to you, so you can get more information about where to look, where to start your journeys with financial planning with these tools. So we'll give you those links sent to you in your inbox. They're also available on our site, and we'll give you a link to the Dale Law Firm site so you can see what their resources look like as well. Okay, onwards to the next slide. So we've talked a bit about ABLE accounts and TrueLink cards, and throughout our conversation, special needs trusts have been thrown in. So I don't think many families actually hear about special needs trusts. So can you explain what a special needs trust is and when someone might consider using one instead of or alongside an ABLE account?
What a special needs trust is a special kind of trust. Think of it like a contract here, and it's a form of what's called a spendthrift trust. So what's common with all special needs trusts is that it's a trust, it's a contract that's set up where the beneficiary is a person with a disability, and then there's a trustee who can never be the person with the disability. And the reason it's a spendthrift trust is that trustee has absolute discretion over all distributions and the beneficiary has none. Now, why would somebody do that? And the reason is that the definition of a resource for both SSI, Medi-Cal, and related programs are assets that the person with a disability has control over. So by putting, for instance, I had a trust that had about $15 million in it. You go, why would you do that? Well, there was reasons for it. And so you could put any amount of money in that trust, and it's not going to count as a resource to the individual, even if they're on SSI, because the trustee has absolute discretion and the beneficiary has none. Therefore, it is not a resource. Now, that works fine for keeping somebody qualified for benefits. But on the other hand, the problem is, especially if we're trying to empower the person with a disability, is the beneficiary has no control over the funds. So it's a great tool for holding funds for a person with a disability, keeping them qualified. There is no limit on how much you could put into it. There are different kinds of special needs trusts, but for the common estate planning trust, you can put any amount of funds in it, keep somebody qualified for benefits. But the problem oftentimes with the trust is, once again, is the trustee has absolute discretion and the beneficiary does not. This is why some of the strategies we might talk about tying it to a TrueLink card or tying it to an ABLE account can get us the best of both worlds. Everybody is an individual. Just because you may share a diagnosis with the community, it still is you're an individual. Hey, it'd be easier for Amy and I if that wasn't true, but that's what it is. So you really have to apply these rules to the individual. For some folks, the loss of control over the funds is not a big deal. For some folks, it's a huge deal, and a lot of the counseling that we do, like many attorneys who do the work in our area, is to work with families and work on that balance between, providing the assets, control, and whatever objectives we're looking at, and to try to get through all of this complexity to come up with something that makes sense. This is where putting all these tools together in the right situation can be something that can be tailored specifically for the individual.
Steve, thank you so much for that information. I think that's going to be so helpful to so many people. Amy, I'm going to throw a surprise question at you. I hope that's okay. But I would love to know, because you mentioned that you have experience with special needs trusts in your personal life. So I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about how it has worked for you. Like what comfort it gives you, what access does it give your son?
Well, right now, our special needs trust is only used for future planning. It was funded, which is unusual actually, because most people don't fund their special needs trust until they pass. But in our case, Scott's grandparents were funding 529 accounts when our children were little for our kids to go to college, and Scott obviously wasn't going to end up in college. So they wanted to give him the same amount of money that they were giving the other grandkids. So the special needs trust was the perfect vehicle for that. So we set up the special needs trust because of an inheritance or a gift that Scott was getting from his grandparents. And right now it's the vehicle that we will use when we pass away for his inheritance. And we know that the funds will be there for Scott to keep his quality of life at the level it is now. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty with the future. We don't know whether the funding he currently gets from the regional center in California will be there. So you have to have some kind of plan for the future for his care. And also, I'm not going to be there. And I do a lot of planning for Scott, and I do a lot of care for Scott. And it will fund a care manager for Scott's future. So it's kind of peace of mind, knowing that the special needs trust is there when and if he needs it. So, which is just that's why it's there. It's there for his future. And the ABLE account is a different vehicle, because that's used now, and that's for his day-to-day life, and it's excellent for his day-to-day spending. So they're kind of two different things in my mind. The special needs trust is for his long-term care, and the ABLE account is for his day-to-day management. That's for me personally.
Some families might have heard of something called a Trump account. I'm wondering, because these are kind of new and in flux, if you can kind of explain what these accounts are, how they work, and if they may affect benefits.
This new thing called a Trump account is a recently enacted savings program And part of it is we're getting very little guidance so far, but I can kind of walk you through how it affects benefits as far as we can tell. It's kind of a hybrid between a custodial account, our Gift to Minors Act accounts or that kind of thing, and a retirement account in that with these funds, it does grow in a tax-free environment. Something very important is, remember, a resource for SSI and Medicaid is anything the benefits recipient can control. So it's restricted from access until adulthood, typically 18. So it would not affect benefits until age 18. You do get the tax preferred growth. You do get there are contribution limits here. And there are limited opportunities here to roll it over into ABLE accounts or other qualified accounts. Currently, there's no guidance that we can find from Medicaid or Social Security at this point, but I'm sure that that will come. So before distributions are permitted, it should not be, and I feel very confident it would not affect benefits. After they're available, it probably will be treated as a resource. So it's like everything in this area. And one thing that one of my little Daleisms is that disability and simple are two words that don't go together. I think this is another example of this. This is something that if you're looking at going for this option, then you need to really stay in touch with educating yourself as the rules develop here about what happens after the Trump account beneficiary turns 18, and how is that going to affect their benefits. Once again, all these rules are under development now, so we're trying to reason how these things actually work.
Thank you for that. I think influx is the way to think of this. Make sure that you speak with a financial advisor to check how things roll in your state, because I know that state by state eligibility is different, but it sounds like the gist is you get $1,000 when your kid is born, if they were born before January 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2028. And that money goes into an account, and that account is invested. So it's kind of like a 401k account. People can add money. I think there's different caps of different states. And that's pretty much it. I know that they launch July 4th, 2026. Hopefully they will be able to work out some very important details. But for now, it just sounds like something to keep an eye on.
And Martha, as far as education is concerned, and this will be in the resource handout we put together, a great place to keep up on this is the Disability Benefits 101.org website or db101.org. I bet you when the rules come out, that website will have an understandable explanation of this. So that's something that I think advocates should bookmark is db101.org.
Mm-hmm. And I cannot tell people enough how excited I am to share the resource pack you gave us. It is pages and pages of resources that we've clicked through and are just blown away. Like, we didn't know they existed, and this is our bread and butter. So I really want to thank you for that and being open to sharing all of that wealth of knowledge with everybody here.
All right. Thank you again, Steve and Amy. We are now going to move into the Q&A portion of the workshop and bring some audience questions for just a deeper dive into the topics covered today. So one question that came in is, what would you say, Steve or Amy, is the biggest misconception people tend to have about ABLE accounts?
I think they just don't really initially understand what they are. And once they learn, that it's kind of like a slam dunk. I mean, it costs like nearly nothing to start one up. And there's no reason, to not have one, because it's a great savings tool. It doesn't count towards benefits, but it can't answer all the questions. I mean, if you're getting a large inheritance for some reason, you can't use your ABLE account for that. You can only save $20,000 a year. So that's one really big thing. You can't leave it to a special needs trust. You can say, when my when the person passes away, you can leave it to the sibling or a sister or a brother with an ABLE account. You can only leave it to a sibling that also qualifies for an ABLE account. You can't designate a beneficiary. That may change in the future, but right now there's no way to do that. So there are limitations. It's still a great thing to have. And in conjunction with the special needs trust, I think if you're able to have a special needs trust because you have a larger sum of money, that's the way to go.
So, this next question gets into a practical concern that may come up for families. What are some common financial mistakes that could unintentionally affect someone's benefits?
I think one of the big mistakes, and I have friends that have just messed it up. They're applying for SSI for their child for the first time, and they forget that their child has a savings bond, or they forget that they've got this bank account, that has money in it, and there's like maybe their name's on it and a grandparent's name is on it or a parent. I mean, all those things are going to keep you from getting SSI. You've got to pay attention to the resources when you are applying to SSI for the first time. To me, that's a really big one because I know so many people that applied for SSI and they just messed it up, and then they have to wait and reapply, and they just don't know the rules ahead of time. So if your child is under 18 and you're thinking about applying for SSI, make sure you understand their financial situation. And then once you're on SSI, if you have to know the rules about what happens if you work and what happens if you have unearned income, and you need to learn all the requirements of being on SSI, what you need to report, because if you don't do these things and then they find out, you get dinged and then you have to pay them back. So it's really important to stay educated once you go on these certain benefits, and to understand that SSI is not the same thing as SSDI, and it's not the same thing exactly as child disability benefits, and just to educate yourself as you move into the various changes that your child's going through. And you don't need to necessarily know that when they're 10 years old, but as they approach 18, that's when you really need to learn about what happens, because at the age of 18, your child is now an adult, and your parents' assets no longer count, but theirs do.
How do these tools work together?
No, I think Steve covered it earlier to some degree, is that if you have both, you can feed money from your special needs trust into your ABLE account. Mm-hmm. So if you're fortunate enough to be able to have both, it's the best of both worlds.
I think in a lot of cases in my law firm, we don't just set these things up. We also assist in the administration, and as the trustee of a pooled trust, I'm the trustee of the Golden State Pooled Trust. Once again, have that same experience, and I think part of it is just trying to fit the tool to the individual here. And in today's world, usually we're using 2 or 3 of these tools all at the same time, depending on what our objective is. I look at it in many cases, the special needs trust is the place where we can, like, for instance, hold a home. You can't put a house in an ABLE account. Haven't figured out how to do that here. So that's something where it can hold the home here, or it can hold other assets. There's not a restriction on the assets and that kind of thing here. The ABLE account is something that can assist in having discretionary funds for the person with the disability, but it also can help if the person is on SSI to reduce the chance of they're going to have a reduction in their benefits because we're paying for housing and that kind of thing. Part of it is the Truling card, once again, has become the standard industry for being able to not only make distributions, but also to account for those distributions. It's a matter of looking at all these different tools, fitting it to the individual, and trying to figure out what works best. But, we go back to, my observation that disability and simple are two things that don't go together. And this is the same situation. It's a matter of working, I think, with experienced advocates, counselors, whatever, to try to make sense of this and fit it to your situation.
How would you recommend someone get started with these tools? Like, we've talked about so many different accounts, we've talked about different opportunities, and I'm wondering, what would someone be able to do this week? What would you want them to try?
Well, I mean, I've had the opportunity, to be working for the Dale Law Firm for like 7-ish years now. So I've listened to Steve's webinars like 7 or 8 or who knows how many, 10 times I've heard the same webinar. And every time I hear it, I probably pick up something else. So you can't beat yourself up because you don't understand all this stuff in a 1-hour webinar. It takes a really long time to learn this stuff. So you need to start small. And I would say if you're eligible for an ABLE account, there is no reason not to set one up. I mean, it's kind of like there's no reason. I can't think of a negative reason not to do it. Special needs trust is a different story. You should learn about them. You should know what they're used for. It's a significant investment to set one up. But it's a good thing to know and think about whether that's something you need to have. I would also, there's so many resources online. There's so many things that you can, so many different webinars offered by so many different organizations. Every time you listen to one, you pick up something else. So go online, Google, what you're trying to learn about, and just keep educating yourself about different things. Network with other parents. I know that when my son was a few years old, I met someone who gave me a lot of information and a lot of resources, and it was extremely helpful. And I'm happy that I can do that with my peer group now because I've had the opportunity to learn so much. So just start small, educate yourself, find resources in your community, if you're in school, if your son is in school, join your community advisory committee. If there's so many different places to network with other parents and other families.
As we wrap up today, what is the most important thing you hope people take away from this conversation?
It is education, but it's really kind of focusing on what is the real goal here. And I think too many times we focus on how can I keep my loved one qualified for a particular benefits program or whatever. And it's not that that isn't important, but sometimes we kind of miss the big picture that true community living isn't just surviving in the community. As a mentor of mine, Ed Roberts, used to say, is if all we do is move folks from large institutions to isolated group homes, here, then what did we really do? We really didn't do anything. Part of community living isn't it just being in the community, it's being part of the community. And part of what we have to look at, and hopefully when you work with your advisors here, is that you're putting a plan together that has that as the goal. The real fact is today, and there are some really fine practitioners, and I think in many ways, if you're looking for an attorney, the first place you want to go to is the Special Needs Alliance website. But part of this is in today's world, anybody can do a special needs trust. That they're all done with software, and all the attorney has to do is hit the right button. But is that the right button for this individual? Here, because the challenge for law firms like me is all of these folks are individuals. It'd be a lot easier if they were all the same, but that's just not the way it works. And trying to put something together that fits that individual and using the benefits and even these tools we're talking about as tools, but that is not the objective. The objective is for persons with disabilities to be able to live in the community and have a quality of life that, quite frankly, many of the non-disabled community take for granted.
Now, I would just say, don't beat yourself up trying to learn all this stuff. quickly. It takes a really long time. And, you have to watch a video or read about it. And I mean, I still, constantly reviewing the rules and the laws because you forget. So don't beat yourself up. Take it, a little step at a time and seek resources either online or in your community. There's so many people out there with special needs. The rates are really alarming. You can find resources almost in your community, I'm sure.
Thank you. I like to think we all love someone that is disabled, and resourcing yourself, educating yourself, and helping is the best way to get started. And so we have a couple of resources available on the screen. We are, for the viewers, going to be sending out the incredible resource pack that Stephen and Amy shared with us. We're also going to have that hosted on our site for anyone that wants to visit it there. You also are going to be given a link to the Dale Law Firm to see the incredible videos that Stephen has put together. They are just beyond helpful. So please take some time to look at those. Oh, pardon me. And just remember, you don't have to figure this out alone, because you're not alone. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Amy. We are so grateful for the wealth of knowledge you shared with us today. Wish everyone the absolute best, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.